Pinewood Mansion, located on a lush green hill, is a symbol of luxury and power. However, on a quiet morning, it became the center of a horrific murder case. William Harrington, the wealthy and powerful owner of the mansion, was found dead in his bed with suspicious marks on his neck. His death not only shocked his family, but also sent ripples throughout the entire community. What happened behind the closed doors of this lavish mansion? Who had the motive to kill a successful businessman like William? These are the questions the entire city is seeking answers to. The night before the incident, Pinewood Mansion hosted a lavish party attended by many important figures in the business world. However, the atmosphere inside wasn't as joyful as it appeared. The underlying tensions between the Harrington family members began to surface. Edward Harrington, William's eldest son, had a heated argument with his father over the distribution of assets. Edward was ambitious, but his impatience made him irritable. Amelia, the youngest daughter, remained mostly silent, but her face was filled with worry and fear. The maid Mary, always quiet and unobtrusive, witnessed everything from a hidden corner of the room. After the party, Edward was seen pacing back and forth in the garden, visibly frustrated. He muttered to himself, the words barely audible, but the anger in his voice was clear. Amelia, too, seemed disturbed. She was found in the library late at night, staring blankly at an old family portrait, her fingers tracing the outline of her father's face. It was as if she was struggling with something deep inside, an unspoken fear or regret. The next morning, as Mary brought breakfast to William's room, she found him lying motionless in his bed, his face pale and eyes wide open in a haunting expression. There were distinct bruises on his neck, signs of strangulation. Mary's scream echoed throughout the mansion, leaving everyone inside in shock. The once grand and lively mansion now turned into a scene of chaos and fear. The murder quickly drew police attention, and Inspector James Donovan was assigned to investigate the case. Inspector Donovan, a seasoned detective with sharp instincts, began the investigation by questioning each member of the Harrington family. Edward appeared cold, denying any involvement in his father's death, but tension was evident in his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, betraying his apparent calmness. Amelia was trembling, insisting she knew nothing and had been in her room all night. Her voice cracked, and tears welled up in her eyes as she described her last interaction with her father. Mary, the first to discover the body, was not exempt from suspicion either. She claimed she was just doing her job, but there was something in her statement that made Donovan uneasy. She avoided eye contact, her gaze shifting nervously around the room. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt suffocating. The grand halls seemed narrower, the opulence overshadowed by the darkness of the crime. Donovan walked through each room, trying to piece together what had happened. He noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Edward and Mary, the way Amelia seemed to flinch at the mention of her brother's name, and how the staff whispered among themselves, their faces pale with fear. Through the investigation, Inspector Donovan began to notice peculiarities in Mary's past. Mary wasn't just an ordinary maid. Before coming to Pinewood, she had a secret relationship with William Harrington. This raised suspicions about her motives. Was she hiding something? Was she seeking revenge, or was she part of a scheme to take over William's assets? Mary's past was shrouded in mystery. She had arrived at Pinewood Mansion 3 years ago, seemingly out of nowhere. Her references were impeccable, but no one knew much about her life before Pinewood. Donovan dug deeper and found traces of a troubled history, an abusive relationship, financial struggles, and a connection to a man who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Could this have been her motive? Was she driven by a need for revenge or survival? Meanwhile, the conflicts among the family members gradually surfaced. Edward always felt he was treated unfairly, believing he was the rightful heir to all the assets. He had always lived in his father's shadow, his accomplishments never enough to earn William's approval. This resentment had grown over the years, turning into a deep-seated hatred. Amelia, on the other hand, had a complicated relationship with a close family friend, someone William disapproved of. The family's tensions were escalating, and William's death seemed to be the final straw in an endless chain of conflicts. Donovan also learned about Amelia's secret. She was in love with a man named Victor, someone her father had vehemently opposed. William had threatened to disown Amelia if she continued the relationship, and the pressure had taken a toll on her. She had been on the verge of leaving Pinewood altogether, hoping to escape the suffocating control of her father. Victor had been seen near the mansion the night of the party, adding another layer of complexity to the case. During the investigation, Inspector Donovan found an anonymous letter in Mary's room. The letter threatened Mary to keep silent about the Harrington family's secrets or face dire consequences. The handwriting was shaky, almost as if the writer had been in a hurry or was overcome with fear. Donovan suspected that Mary had been used and threatened by Edward, forcing her to become part of a dark conspiracy. The letter wasn't the only clue. Donovan also found a hidden compartment in William's study. Inside, there were documents that revealed William's plan to change his will. He intended to leave most of his fortune to Amelia, while Edward would receive only a small portion. This discovery was a turning point in the investigation. It provided a clear motive for Edward. Greed and fear of losing everything had pushed him over the edge. After days of meticulous investigation, Donovan finally uncovered the truth. The culprit was none other than Edward Harrington. After learning that William intended to revise his will, giving most of the assets to Amelia and leaving Edward only a small portion, Edward decided to act. He used Mary, threatening her so she wouldn't dare reveal anything. On the night of the incident, Edward sneaked into his father's room and strangled him to death. The act was premeditated, fueled by years of resentment and a desperate need to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Edward tried to stage the scene to frame Amelia, making her the prime suspect for a while. He planted Amelia's belongings near the crime scene and even forged a note suggesting she had a motive to harm their father. However, inconsistencies in Edward's statements and irrefutable evidence led Donovan to the final conclusion. Edward's fingerprints on the pillow and a secretly recorded conversation between Edward and Mary proved everything. In her desperation, Mary had recorded the conversation as a means of self-defense. The recording captured Edward's threats and his chilling confession of what he had done. When arrested, Edward admitted his crime with a calm demeanor, but his eyes couldn't hide the despair. He said he did everything because he felt abandoned and treated unfairly by his father. Greed and hatred had driven Edward to the edge, turning him into a murderer. He spoke of years of neglect, of always being the second choice, of the pressure to live up to an impossible standard. His voice was devoid of remorse, but there was a hint of sadness, a realization that he had destroyed everything, including himself. Mary, though not directly involved in the killing, had become part of the tragedy due to her silence. She admitted she was too terrified by Edward's threats. She described the nights she spent sleepless, fearing for her life, knowing the terrible secret she was forced to keep. After the case was resolved, Mary decided to leave Pinewood Mansion. She could no longer live in a place haunted by horrific memories. The grand halls, once filled with laughter and opulence, now felt like a prison, each corner a reminder of the darkness she had witnessed. Amelia, after being cleared of suspicion, also decided to leave everything behind. She realized that wealth could not bring happiness if it had to be exchanged for tension and suffering. She moved to another city, seeking peace and starting a new life, far from the conflicts and sorrows of her family. She found solace in simplicity, in a life where she could make her own choices without the shadow of her family's expectations looming over her. Victor joined her, and together they began to rebuild, finding strength in each other after everything they had lost. The murder at Pinewood Mansion has ended, but the wounds and dark secrets remain. This is not just a story of greed and betrayal, but also a cautionary tale about the value of money and power. Is wealth really worth the price of happiness and the lives of loved ones? The Harringtons learned this lesson too late, but perhaps their story can serve as a warning to others. The grandeur of Pinewood Mansion now stands as a hollow reminder of what was lost: love, trust, and the true meaning of family. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below.